Okay, what I would like to present here is an ongoing research project which is called PESHAT, a digitized multilingual thesaurus of medieval philosophical and scientific Hebrew terminology. Okay. The project actually exists already, has been existing for about 6 years. It has been actually 2 different separate phases. The first phase was a project which was funded as a binational project by the German Deutsche Forschungsgesellschaft, the DFG, and the Agence Nationale de la Recherche, with the collaborators in France, Gerd Freudenthal from the CNRS, Giuseppe Veltri from Halle University, myself from the Hebrew University, and Resian Fontaine from the Universiteit from Amsterdam, with a center in Halle, with a coordinator and a couple of research assistants who were working in the project. The first phase of the project was mainly dedicated, and I will speak about this in a moment, to the development of the database program, something which is not a trivial task, as we found out. We actually started as quite naive scholars in humanities and ended up as people who were almost, well, at least in a quite different stage and state. In the first period, the building up of a database and the program, which eventually was done by a company here in Jerusalem, by the Miros software company here in Jerusalem, took a lot of time. And another big part was the first insertion of data into this database, into this multilingual digitized thesaurus, mainly in order to try it out and to make all kinds of mistakes, in order to correct the database, to further develop it. And now we have a second, I should do it from here, I guess, a second phase in which the project has a little bit changed its name. It's now PESHAT in Context, which is funded exclusively by the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft for 12 years. And the main target of these 12 years will be to feed this database with data and to work systematically on the corpus of medieval Hebrew scientific and philosophical literature. The purpose of the second part is also to have all kinds of workshops, conferences on different phases of the development of Hebrew medieval terminology in both the fields of science and philosophy. But PESHAT, as the project is called, should also be, and I will come back to this, a platform for cooperation with scholars from outside the project who are working with in these fields. The starting point of the project actually goes back much into history. The starting point for this idea is a scholar, philosopher, also a Zionist politician or activist of the early 20th century. His name is Yaakov Glatzkin. He was very much interested in actually supporting the revival of the Hebrew language, especially in the field of philosophy. He was, by the way, also convinced that anything in philosophy that is written in the Hebrew language automatically is Hebrew philosophy. For that reason, he also, for example, translated Spinoza into Hebrew, one of the first Spinoza translation into it. But the thing which is most important for us is his Thesaurus. He wrote a 4-volume Thesaurus of the medieval philosophical Hebrew language, which has about 3,042 entries on 1,200 pages in 4 volumes. And this Thesaurus, this Lemma Search, has been a working tool for scholars working on medieval Hebrew philosophy for decades. But this book also has a number of disadvantages. It brings rather little information about the origins of the term, neglects a certain number of authors after the 13th century. It's mainly interested in 12th century terminology. It is quite unsystematic in the choice of the terms it brings, and it is, and this is a new aspect of this database which we are now creating, not multilingual. So in order to briefly describe what we intend to do and what we are doing, we actually can go back to the title of the whole project. We are working on a digitized multilingual thesaurus of medieval philosophical and scientific Hebrew terminology. So if we start from the end, what we are working on is the philosophical and scientific terminology in the pre-modern period, that is not philosophical terminology created after the revival of the Hebrew language in the 19th century. The focus will be, of course, the classical Hebrew philosophical and scientific literature produced, let's say, in the 13th to the 15th century, but also the earlier period, which started more or less, as we all know, perhaps in the 11th, 12th century. Then we have this big movement of the Tibonite family in southern France, but also other centers of translations in France and Spain, and then a later period, especially in the 16th and 17th century. We are interested in both original works in Hebrew, in the Hebrew language, and translations from other languages into Hebrew, and to a certain extent, as you will see later on, also translations from Hebrew into other languages. The focus of the project is to actually twofold. One is to develop a tool for the study of terminologies, different terminologies in medieval Hebrew in the Hebrew language, to document also the transmission or the transfer of terminology from one language into another one, but also to document, if we are now again speaking about the Hebrew level, the diversity of Hebrew terminologies, because there was, of course, a kind of formative movement for the creation of medieval Hebrew philosophical and scientific terminology, which is connected to the Tibonite family, but there were also many other attempts to create scientific Hebrew terminology, which are sometimes for readers today quite hard to understand, because they are much less familiar to us than the terminology which we all know, or most of us know from the Hebrew translation, let's say, of the Morene Buchim and so on, so the Tibonite terminology. Our limitation is, as I've said, medieval or pre-modern, and another thing is that we have adopted the Thesaurus model for our database, which means that what we intend to do is not only to give a dictionary, which is Hebrew terms with translations and equivalents in other languages, but to document the usage of a specific term by quotations within the database. Yeah, the document which we define as a Thesaurus model of the database. And here I would like to add one technical aspect of the project. We are in this project not working with a full text database from where we automatically take the quotes which document the usage, but we actually search the texts manually, or how would you say, ocularly, and choose the quotes which we consider to be appropriate in order to document and to exemplify the usage of a term. This is mainly based upon the decision that we wanted to use the most recent and scientifically best editions for this work, and in most cases it was impossible for copyright reasons, for example, to feed our database with the complete texts. Now, what does it mean, multilingual thesaurus of the Hebrew terminology? Multilingual means that the quotes which that we bring and the explanation of the terminology is always done in connection with the languages from which Hebrew texts were translated and into which the Hebrew texts were translated. Which means, and we will see it in a minute, that every quote which has parallel versions, which are connected with the Hebrew text, will be accessible in all the different versions and forms, and you can skip or switch in a very easy way from one quote to the other one, and we will see it in a minute. It is, of course, a digitized one, which means it is accessible on the internet, and it is permanently open for further development, for further feeding it. You are not planning to produce at any stage of the project a printed version of this Thesaurus. There will be no Klatskin 2 or so, which will replace the printed Klatskin 1. It will always be a database. So what we actually try to do, if we are speaking about science and technology, is the idea of transforming a classical device, a classical tool of philological research, the Thesaurus, into something more modern. Although I have to admit that there are certain points in which we still have remained rather conservative. As I've said, the decision not to base the database on full text, on a full text pool of editions, for example, is one of the things which actually still connects us to the more traditional form. The database is already accessible also for guests and visitors on this homepage, and now I take the risk of trying to open this page. And just to show you a few examples, what we are able to do in this database program. Okay, this is our homepage. We have here on the left side a couple of possibilities. Here we also pay a due tribute to our predecessor, our important predecessor, Klatskin. You can also browse the old Klatskin, whoever needs it, in the on this database. We have a call for cooperation. But what I would like to do now is actually to enter the database. And okay, so within this database we actually have 4 different access points to the information which is fed to the database. Let me start with a simple Lemma Search, which is based upon the skeleton of the database, which is still the Hebrew scientific terminology. It's multilingual, but the skeleton, the basic structure is actually the Hebrew terminology. And if we choose, for example, one Hebrew term, I might add here the term avil, which is the Hebrew term for air. You get a definition, occasionally also more than one definition if a certain term is used in different meanings. On this occasion you also get the possibility to get a number of lemma details, which is different grammatical forms and spellings. And more in detail, you get a list of equivalents in other languages, and you can jump immediately to a list of different quotes from Hebrew literature where this term is used. But you also can, in this case here, for example, in this case of a quote from the Al-Kharizi Hebrew translation of the Moreh Nebuchim, in which the term avil appears. You can go back with one click to the Judeo-Arabic original, and you can jump back from the you have also a variant version in case you need the Arabic text in Arabic script. and you can go back to the translation, and hold on for a moment. As you all know, the Alcharisi translation was also translated into Latin at a certain stage. You can also get immediately the parallel quotation in Latin. We tried, and this is something else which was very important for us. We concentrate, of course, as I've said, on Hebrew terminology, but we want to render it into a useful research tool also for scholars who have some knowledge of Hebrew, who are interested in texts where Hebrew is somehow involved, but who are not necessarily, whose starting point in their research is not necessarily the Hebrew text or the Hebrew terminology. And for this purpose, there is also the possibility to start from a term search. And here, for example, we can, and I hope that it's going to work, but you should be able to enter the word aer, press the language Latin, and then you get the avir as a Hebrew rendering of the Latin aer with again equivalents and cuts. So this is one of the access points which we hope will be really useful for people, of course, who know some Hebrew, at least read Hebrew letters, and are interested in the transmission, in the transfer of terminology between different cultural areas to other fields, and have relatively little time to go into details. And as a matter of fact, these are things which are not fully developed yet, and the more data we will have in the database, the results will be also more significant. I only would like to explain here what we have been doing. It is possible to search certain subject fields, and for example to filter the terminology which are looking for, let's say, logic for certain geographical regions. So for example, in case you want to study the logical terminology which was used by authors in Spain from 1200 to 1400 in Hebrew, you can make a click. Unfortunately, there are not enough data in the database now in order to exemplify it really. You have the possibility to filter it, and then you get a full list of the logical terminology, for example, which is relevant for this specific period in this specific region. Or alternatively, you have the possibility to look for certain authors. For example, you can look for, let's say, Averroes, and you can check for, in the case of Averroes, of course, Hebrew quotes which we have in our text, either of Averroes as an author or a translator, which is of course not relevant. In this case, you will not have any relevant results. And in our case, of an author of a Hebrew translation, and this is actually what would be relevant here, then you later on can also filter the results according to the works which were used for the database, which we have scrutinized systematically in our project, and so on. So this is actually the basic structure. The basic idea is, as I've said, Hebrew as an intermediate language is in the transfer of texts from certain cultural backgrounds into other cultural backgrounds. As I've said, we have just started this year with the second part of the project, the Chat in Context project. What needs to be done there within these 12 years, which we now have, we try to systematically study, of course, only selected works, central selected works of the Hebrew philosophical and scientific literature. We will start within a period of about 2 years with the translations produced in the Tibonite family. Then we will have about between 6 months and 1 year for the pre-Tibonite Hebrew scientific and philosophical terminology. and later on more years for non-Tibonite translations of the 13th and 14th century and post-Tibonite translations. As I've said, we will organize around these research phases also conferences. The advantages of the concentration of specific phases, and let's say not on specific terms or branches of science, is that this will allow us really to carry out, as we hope, significant research on the development of Hebrew scientific terminology in specific historical periods. But as I've said, we are very open and very much interested also in opening this project, for example, for PhD students, for people who are working on texts which are in which Hebrew versions are somehow involved. In, let's say, Latin translations where the Hebrew is a source of translation, or on Hebrew texts which were translated from other texts, to collaborate with us and to discuss with us how their information and how their knowledge of Hebrew terminology and the transfer between different languages can be actually fed into this database to make it accessible to a wide range of scholars. Thank you very much.